Welcome to Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation with a changemaker working to accelerate the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. How we think and feel about the climate response, whether that's optimistic, pessimistic, cynical, or pragmatic, shapes our perceptions of possible solutions. And too often, we argue over perceptions and not hard climate data. But hard data is sterile. It doesn't necessarily engage the passions that move us to act. So we tell stories, and we often focus on what can go wrong. If it bleeds, it leads, is the old journalistic saw. And our guest today, Justin Bean, is author of a new book, What Could Go Right? Justin is a longtime Silicon Valley executive and advisor to sustainability startups who currently works as sustainability strategy and solution lead at Hitachi's environmental business group. He wrote What Could Go Right as an antidote to the doom and gloom reporting, as he describes it, that he says dominates our climate coverage. Instead, he argues that social and technological progress to date has prepared society for a rapid transition to low carbon living. He says we can move from today's complicated polycrisis, when so many different human systems are failing, to what he describes as an omni-thriving world in which new jobs and business opportunities can deliver a just and prosperous future. There's a lot to discuss here. What Can Go Right is available online at Amazon and at powellbooks.com. You can find it in local bookstores as well. And you can learn more about Justin at justincbean.com. That's all one word, Justin C. Bean, no space, no dash, justincbean.com. Welcome to the show, Justin. How you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Mitch.
Well, thank you for joining us. And your book, it was a fun read. I share your optimism and your pragmatism. But what I wanted to start with is this question. We're clearly at a turning point. Why is the world facing so many challenges, a sort of polycrisis of collapsing, or at least apparently collapsing systems?
Yeah, I think the answer is as complex as the problem, right? I mean, we're not only seeing one crisis coming at us at a time. We've got climate change, we've got changes in social orders and social perceptions and the way that we have our social contracts in place. We also have changes in technology, and that makes changes in economies, which leads to changes in geopolitics. And so within all of those changes come conflict. And so we often observe those conflicts as crises. And some of them are true crises. I think climate change is definitely one that stands out as one that is a big crisis for the human race, possibly existential. I think the human race will survive one way or the other. It's just, will our civilization survive, and will our societies survive if most of our cities, especially the ones near water, become flooded? So there's big crises that are all kind of compounding and mixing in with each other. And so that increases complexity pretty rapidly. And that's why it becomes a more difficult problem to solve.
Well, you wrote the book, as you described, as an antidote to the gloom and doom reporting. And right. The gloom and doom reporting extends a Western tradition, which is to see everything as a decline from some sort of perfection that we started at.
Right.
But what you're describing is growth, not just crisis. We're evolving. And there's a book that I really found enlightening, was Hans Rosling's Factfulness, 10 Reasons We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. And unfortunately, Mr. Rosling passed away a few years ago. Your book is sort of an extension of what he's doing. What's the benefit of taking a positive perspective on this when so many crises are converging?
Yeah. And the way I like to say it is, I'm optimistic about some things and I'm pessimistic about others, but really that doesn't matter, right? What matters is doing something about it. And so when you focus on envisioning what could go right and envisioning that world that you're trying to get to, or the ideal that you're trying to create, it gives you something to build towards. And then you can, backcast from that perfection or from that ideal, and then start planning and putting out steps and giving yourself tasks and collaborating together and building companies and startups and anything else that you can do to actually get there. So I think the word optimist, I think, is a little misplaced in some of these cases, right? So people look at, people like me and you, and they say, oh, you're just an optimist, right? There's this whole sense of this is a naive Pollyanna optimism that doesn't look at the pragmatic approach or is not aware of or concerned about the challenges that we face. And I think that's misplaced. I think it's really about transcending that whole paradigm or that whole spectrum and saying, great, there's a problem. We know it. Let's do something about it. And the way you do something about it is you understand the problem, but then if all you focus on is the problem, you don't really have a place to go. Right. And so it's more important, I think, or it's an important area where there's a gap and where I think we're lacking in a lot of the public conversation to envision what that ideal is and envision where we really want to go and agree in some places on what that looks like. And then we can really get excited about it and go out and build it, because when you're actually building towards something that you want, you're much more energized, your mind is much more creative and focused, and you've got all of your creativity at hand, and people are excited to collaborate together, and it's fun. And when human beings are productive and having a good time and collaborating, we can create some amazing things. And so I think that's why it's so important to focus on that, what we might call an optimistic ideal. And it doesn't mean we're ever going to create the utopia. It doesn't mean we create the perfection. But what the society we live in today and the world we live in today would be considered utopian by the standards of people just a few generations ago.
When I look back at just how much things have changed since the 60s when I grew up, it's astonishing. But the thing is, people love to focus on the negative. If it bleeds, it leads is the news way of putting it. Right. And there's a lot of bloody stuff going on. So, about 40 years ago, computer scientist Alan Kay said the only way to predict the future is to invent it. What do you think the big targets for innovation are in order for us to move through the climate crisis and to address all the other things that are going on?
Yeah, I think there are some trends that are coming out that are going to help us focus on what those solutions are. And one is just the incredible investment in climate tech and in climate change solutions. And those could be nature-based solutions too. I'm not just saying it has to be silicon-based. And so the number of dollars or yen or any other kind of currency being thrown at that is enormous. So when we look at climate tech, there's a huge growth. I think it was 260 billion have been raised for climate tech since 2018, and 50 billion of that was last year. Yeah. Right. And so it's growing really rapidly. And there's much more awareness, and there's diversification within that. So just a couple of years ago, 90% of it was in 3 verticals: energy, transportation, and food. And now 30% of the total, instead of 10%, is industry, carbon management, climate, and built environment startups. So we're not only seeing more money coming into the space, we're seeing more diversification. So I think, one, there's more money coming at it, which means there's more resources for solutions. And then 2, I think the democratization trend is really empowering people in many different ways. And so we're going from this sort of, controlled, hierarchical, do what you're told, schooling based on this industrial model of you're a factory worker, come and do your job safely. And that means, and efficiently. And that means, do these repeated tasks efficiently, to a world of everybody's a little bit of an entrepreneur. And I think that's more natural for human beings anyway, where if you look at developing countries, everyone's got a business, right? Everyone's, working at the market, or they're providing a service. And we're naturally a very industrious species. And so the democratization through digital tools and automation, I think, is putting power back in the hands of everyday people to be able to build their own businesses much more easily, to be able to access capital much more easily, to collaborate with each other much more easily, and to actually build tools and build physical things, not just digital things, more easily. So there's more solutions in the hands of people and tools in the hands of people to create those solutions for the future. And we don't have to really ask permission as much anymore. And I think that trend is going to explode. And I'll just say, on top of that, not only is there more capital available for us to do that, there's more opportunity for us to invest in those businesses. So with the passage of the Jobs Act and with the opening of equity crowdfunding, the everyday investor has been opened up to the world of venture capital and private equity in some cases, and all of these areas that carry a higher risk for sure, and people need to be careful about it, but have much higher returns, and we can be a part of that growth with each other instead of we are the workers doing our job for wages, and there are a few people with lots of money who can invest and make much, much more money. So I think those trends are creating more buy-in and more ownership in the economy as it diversifies, democratizes, and grows, and moves towards creating solutions for the challenges we face as a people.
Well, and I think, and looking at this both as somebody who's been involved in technology for decades and looking from the carbon perspective, we're moving past this focus on the carbon emissions in and of themselves to this wider relationship with one another and in nature. Right. And as you break down global economies into regional circular economies, which will interact with one another, there'll still be a global economy. A lot more money stays closer to the people.
Right.
And that isn't socialism. That is just more distributed capitalism.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you've got people like Elon Musk who now have more money than God. How do we rethink our relationship with one another and with nature concurrently?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I share your thought around those local circular economies and how they become participatory capitalism. And I think that participatory capitalism is how we move forward with less of that conflict. I mean, as we get more inequality, we see more conflict, right? There's the whole Gini index, and once we cross over, I think 0.45 or 0.5, we get more and more likely to see riots and social dissolution and difficulty in societies holding together. And part of that is, concentrations in wealth. So I think Elon Musk is a really interesting case study in this, because in one way, he's actually used his wealth in incredibly helpful ways, right? And he has said, I want to channel this money. This money isn't about conspicuous consumption. It's about being able to use it to create the solutions for the future. So with Tesla, that was about electrifying the transportation ecosystem. Yes, we need bikes. Yes, we need buses. Yes, we need many other solutions, not just electric cars, but it's one part of the solution. And I think he's done a great job building that. Another part is the continuation of consciousness past the end of the Earth, right? So we've got maybe 500 million, maybe 2 billion years until the sun explodes. Or grows rapidly and swallows the Earth, right? And that is the end of all life on Earth as we know it. Humans are the only species here that can continue to bring the light of consciousness out into the cosmos and survive that event. And so, space, it's interesting. We need it for science, all of that. But also, I think the long-term goal of becoming a spacefaring multiplanetary species is a good one. And I know it's been criticized quite a lot. And there's definitely some egos between the billionaires going on in that space race. But that money has been used to create solutions. And I think that's the right way to be rich. Granted, he has some things I disagree with. I mean, but go ahead.
Sure, everybody does. And him particularly egregiously so. But
sure. He's no angel.
How do you think our current notions about compensation for creating value and the economic order that we know today are going to change to enable this more egalitarian outcome?
Yeah. For me, it's I think there are ways that we have gotten stuck in this. It's either capitalism or it's communism kind of mindset. Right. And a lot of those economic doctrines were written 200 years ago plus, right, with small updates along the way. And we live in such a more complicated world with so much more data and with so many more dynamics going on because of technology and because of interacting societies. And that gives us a really good opportunity to update those models, right? And that it doesn't have to be on that continuum. We actually are doing many new types of economic experiments that show us that we can do things differently and be successful at it. So I think, yes, we need to rethink the way that we relate to each other economically. And it doesn't mean that we have to either have, a giant monolithic, all-powerful government that taxes us at 75% and, it tells us how our money will be spent from our hard work, or we have this libertarian society where, some few entrepreneurs become oil barons and steel barons, and everybody else is, kind of homeless and begging at the doors for a penny. I think that's false. And like I said, the move to a more distributed and democratized economy, I think, is going to empower so many more people to not only create businesses and create wealth for themselves, but to create more jobs for each other and empower those who work with them to take leadership and, have plenty of wealth to live well, and that gets distributed to more and more people, as opposed to a very, sort of barbell society where we've got a few very rich people and a few very poor people and not much in the middle. I think that expands the middle class quite a lot and gives routes to the middle class for a lot of people who are now impoverished.
Well, that's a great setting for the next section of the conversation, but I'm going to take a quick commercial break. We're going to be right back. Hey, we're back to continue the conversation with author Justin Bean, whose new book, What Could Go Right, takes an optimistic view of the climate crisis and our response to it. Justin, you deliver a very positive assessment of China's economic miracle, and we were talking a moment ago about this kind of capitalism versus communism dichotomy we always choose to look at these questions through. The country's economic miracle, they've lifted 850 million people out of poverty in 30 years, which is astonishing, is what you describe a stable and involved government. Of course, it's also totalitarian government. What forms of government do you see ascendant in the next economy? Or at least what forms of government should we be aware of being ascendant and might want to adjust?
Yeah. China's really interesting because, as you said, they've lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and that is a big win, and that's really positive for many of us human beings. At the same time, they are an authoritarian, totalitarian government, and getting more so, or they're being exposed more for that government is being exposed more for what it is. And so we're seeing it in a lot of the protests and how they deal with them, and many other ways. And I think that is a big risk as we move forward to the future, especially with surveillance technology and with weaponization of technology. That, I dedicate part of this book, and this was a fun and very disturbing section of this book, where I said, let's not be naive, though. This could all go terribly. Let's look at what could go wrong, right? We could go into a society, especially if there's more conflict globally, and there is, an excuse or justification for governments to take authoritarian control and use this technology for, deep surveillance and autocratic or authoritarian governments that take over. And I think it's complicated for China, and we're seeing that today, right? Their response to the COVID protests, right, and the COVID lockdowns that were continuing, at first was very authoritarian, right? Mm-hmm. But they relaxed that finally after protest after protest after protest of the people, and I think they're going to see that with economic growth, especially in a distributed sense like they have, and not like a Saudi Arabia where it all comes from one place like oil. When it comes from that distributed sense, democracy and liberty more so starts becoming demanded. And I think that's something that emerges as a pattern when you study the rise of democracies. There's kind of a question of, does democracy breed development, or does development breed democracy? Mm-hmm. And what some of those studies have shown is that development actually breeds more democracy, as long as you're not in a country that got it all from oil or got it all from one sector. And so that's a positive, I think, outcome or trend that we can look towards.
Well, there are two technologies that you describe in the book that are key to that transition, not the governmental transition, but it could be part of the governmental transition. And that's AI and the Internet of Things. Internet of Things allows us to track everything. AI to actually respond to all that data in real time rather than having to wait 5 years for somebody to do a study.
Yeah.
So how do you respond to concerns that AI in particular will displace workers and also serve as a tool to misinform citizens?
It absolutely will, and it already is, right? When we look at the disinformation campaigns of the last few years, a lot of that is leveraging social media, analytics, and AI to better target people and understand how to manipulate people through disinformation campaigns. And we've seen that was targeted from Russia, China, and outside actors, as well as some inside the US. And so that's a real concern. It's already happened. AI has displaced some workers, but also is creating immense opportunities. And
what
so
kind of opportunity?
ChatGPT, I think ChatGPT is a really relevant example of this, right? That we just saw a lot of journalists get laid off. And I think that's partially due to the fact that a lot of these companies realize that they can enter a query into ChatGPT and now they can get an article.
Yeah, but what they're going to find is that they get the same article all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the variety that humans put into our intellectual intercourse is what is the vital center. So do you imagine people whose jobs are sort of being obsoleted by AI also being compensated for their ongoing contribution to training those AIs to be more responsive?
I think, yeah, it's just a change in the way we do it. And so journalists are still needed. And part of their job is going to be understanding how to query things like ChatGPT, just like Google search, right? So when Google first came out, you would just ask it some question and get, some questionable answers. And then we had to learn, all of us, how to do a Google search better to get the information we're looking for. Now there's so much information and so many responses that something like ChatGPT becomes much more helpful. And as we learn how to query it better, we can get better responses and better research and better answers that inform how we write about things or how we think about things. And it just sort of takes us to that next level, right? It's almost like a calculator where instead of spending our time on arithmetic, we can start thinking more about more conceptual mathematics and physics and how to apply that math for other purposes. So I think that there will be some loss of jobs, and we're already seeing some of it. The classic example is the autonomous trucks and truck drivers losing, those jobs, which is a great middle-class job for many people. But with these new tools that come out, the economy will shift. And I think it will shift in the direction of AIs doing things that AIs are good at, which is often repetitive tasks, huge amounts of data, sorting through it, things that we get bored with. And then human beings will be able to focus on things that human beings are good at, which is more communication and collaboration, creativity. And that will be enabled and multiplied and magnified by the tools that AI gives us.
Well, you just hit on a really interesting point that I've been thinking a lot about, because AI could be a hectoring tyrant, or it could be a very helpful coach. And it's how you modulate all of that communication, all the data flowing in from the Internet of Things saying, here's your environmental impact for real. Now you can do something rather than do something. Can do and do are two different kinds of interaction. And so there's a lot of work to be developed around just making these tools friendly. Yeah.
And a lot of them will be operating in the background as they are today, right? Yeah. There's tons of AI operating in the background of Amazon and Google search and everything else that we kind of take for granted. And we just assume, TikTok is going to give me the video of the cats that I love watching, right? And it's good to give somebody else a, cookbook recommendation or something like that. And I think it'll operate often in the background of our lives and just make our cars more efficient, make the activities that we do more efficient. And then it'll also come out and we'll learn how to use it more effectively to make those choices more efficiently or more sustainably moving forward. And you're right, it won't be or shouldn't be, you must do this or you lose these, social credit points. Yeah. It'll be more, hey, if you want to live more sustainably, here's a better choice. You can choose that. How about this thing? Or here's an idea.
Incentive oriented rather than punitive.
Yeah. And I think as they learn more about humanity, they'll learn that humanity acts better when it's excited about something and interested in something. And so we're more excited about the carrot than the stick. Now, people will say that you have 10 times the emotional reaction of fear, right? Because there might be a lion in the bush, and so you need to escape and your life depends on it, than from something positive, right? You remember a lot of the negative things people say and few of the good things they say, right? But when you look at when people take sustained action over time, it's when they're inspired and when they're excited about something. It's almost like the fear is just a, shot of adrenaline, or, drinking a shot of coffee or 8 shots of coffee, versus a sustained action over time, which is how we actually get change, right? It's almost like we're fed this narrative that life is a Marvel movie and it all leads up to the grand battle, and you win that one battle and all is good. But all really done. Winning at life is like brushing your teeth, right? You can't brush your teeth really well once and then have great dental health. You need to consistently brush your teeth well over time, or even if you brush your teeth mediocrely over the years, several times a day, you're going to be in much better health than if you brush it, once a week really well.
Now, you mentioned the Jobs Act earlier, and we have the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the largest climate investment the country's ever made. What would, in your opinion, against the backdrop of everything we've been talking about, what would a really transformative national investment look like?
I think we're seeing part of it. Infrastructure is really important, right? And partially because so much of our infrastructure has about a 50 to 80 year lifespan, and it was built about 70 years ago. And so we need to update our infrastructure. And electrification and all of that is going to be really important, right? So I think we're doing a lot of the right thing there. I think another part of it would be fueling that democratization and distribution of jobs. So the Jobs Act was really good because that helped us to create more funding for more startups and more businesses, which are what I think the economy is going to be shifting more towards. If there were a way that we could fund those types of policies that help small businesses and give people more of a safety net in order to create businesses, I think that would be a strong win for the economy, because we've seen that people are more entrepreneurial when they're not fearing, destitution from starting a business. And I think education is another big piece, right? The modernization of education and investments in, we had investments in internet access and computers in schools, and that was a great first step back in like the 90s and 2000s. Now I think the use of AI assisted tools in schools will be really helpful, because what you're dealing with today is, any teacher is basically teaching to the average or the middle of the class, where half of the students are bored and then half of the students are lost, right? And so I think with some tools in place where, AI and gamification of education could make it a lot more fun and a lot more engaging for students, and also more effective for them, so that if it can learn the rate at which they learn and the ways that they learn, and feeds it back to them in a way that they're able to understand and retain,
or bring the teacher in at the right moment, which I think is really the resource allocation problem in the classroom.
Yeah, and sort of change that model, right? Because that's where we learn how to interact with each other, and it's still again based on this sort of authority. One person is telling the knowledge to all the students type of model, and then you get out into the real world, and it's not really like that. It's all about initiative and collaboration and problem solving. So I think letting the AIs help us figure out these sort of memorization tasks of understanding math and reading and concepts and things like that, and then we move into the classroom as a workshop, and you're collaborating with others every day in school in order to complete a project or solve a challenge, and that kind of thing is. One, school would have been so much more fun if we were doing that. But two, there would be, less of a barrier between you graduated, now you're in the real world, and it's completely different, right? And being in the workforce is a very different experience than being in a classroom. And so I think a ramp up through investments in education and maybe some guidance would help us get there.
Now, we only have a couple of minutes left, and this has been a fascinating conversation, but I wanted to ask this question, and that is, a lot of the discussion is around how do we get to a perfect solution.
Hmm.
For instance, there's criticism of mining for minerals for EVs, which actually represents a tiny fraction of what we annually mine for fossil fuels. So we would make a huge step forward where people say, well, we can't do that because it's still mining. Is that kind of maximalism, the demand that solutions be perfect or just not be pursued at all, preventing our progress? And how do we break through that logjam?
Yeah, I think it is preventing our progress because, like you said, it's lacking in context.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think on the other side, we need to be really honest with ourselves about what those impacts are, because mining can be unethical and it can be detrimental to the environment, and batteries aren't yet fully recyclable. And those are often, I think, they're criticisms that are true and real in some cases, but they're being weaponized often by those who have an interest in preventing that transition. But there's immense innovation in battery recycling. I mean, you can go look up 20 startups that are working on the new chemistry.
We've had them on the show.
Exactly, right? And it's really exciting. And so these batteries have a 20-year lifespan, let's say. So with that 20-year lifespan, there's incredible amounts of innovation that'll be going on in the next 20 years. So I think on one side, there is no perfect solution. It's always going to be a mix of solutions, and it's not going to be the, single monolithic solution that we sort of had in the past with the Industrial Revolution, where it was steel, coal, oil, right? Instead, it's going to be a mix of EVs and hydrogen and biofuels and bikes and public transit and all these other things that give us more freedom, more options, and in a clean way. And it's going to be many, many solutions in sustainable mining, in sustainable battery recycling, in many, many other parts of that entire value chain are being innovated. And I think therein lies the big opportunity for all of us, because all parts of the value chain and all parts of the economy are up for grabs to turn into a sustainable operation, and one that's more cost effective, more efficient, better for consumers, better for the environment, and you can create great wealth for yourself by doing so.
What I took away from the book ultimately was that there's a choice to make, whether you choose to think of living sustainably as meaning living with less, or whether you choose to see it as living better because we're not over consuming.
Yep.
And that's an evolving conversation. How can our listeners follow your work and talk with you about it?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a really important part of the book, that there's this idea that sustainable living means we live in small, dark, cold apartments. Yeah. And, we feel shame every time we go out and try to live. And that's terrible. That no one wants to live there. And it's actually not going to work. If we moved in that direction, there would be riots in the streets. Yeah. And so the only path forward in my mind is sustainable abundance. And I believe we can have it. It's within our view, and there are many people working on it. And so I think the choice really is about joining that momentum. And if it's your career, if it's your education, if you're just getting started, or if it's volunteering, whatever it is, there are many routes to getting involved and building that sustainable abundance and having conversations with people about it, because people are understandably afraid and fearful and depressed about what they see in the news, that there's a lot of bad things coming our way and have already happened. And so kind of shifting that narrative to what can we do about it? Let's get excited. Let's go build something. Let's make this sustainable. Let's join this group that's already doing it. I think would be a really big mind shift that we need, that would get people out of the sort of inaction of depression and inaction of fear and into the excited, proactive and creative momentum of building that better future.
So should folks stop by justincbean.com and share some ideas with you? How can they help?
Sure. If you want to learn more, justincbean.com has a bit about myself, or reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm on JBino, and I'm always sharing some thoughts and research there. So feel free to engage on any of those platforms, and happy to hear from you.
Justin, thank you very much for spending time with the Earth911 community today.
Mitch, thank you so much for having me, and thanks to all your listeners for tuning in. Appreciate it.
We've been talking with Justin Bean, author of What Could Go Right, which is available online at Amazon and at powellbooks.com. You can learn more about Justin at justincbean.com. Justin C. Bean is all one word, no space, no dashes, justincbean.com. I think we need to be optimistic, and that over the long run, humans' abilities to thrive in the face of evolving challenges have shown optimism is warranted. Yes, we're in a crisis, but we've been in plenty before. As Justin said, we can see this transition as a burden or an opportunity to improve. He said both that engaging in change can be fun and, I quote, very disturbing, unquote. That's not a suggestion that we minimize our worries, but that we look them straight on. The distributed, democratically governed future is possible, though we face aggressive alternative forms of government like China. But we've always confronted those challenges, and humanity is still here, and democracy is still holding on. We all have choices to make. That's the point. And understanding our options is the first step toward a better future. As Justin says, a lot could go right. I hope you'll take a few minutes to share this show or any of the other more than 360 episodes of Sustainability in Your Ear that we produced with your friends, family, neighbors. Talk to your coworkers and boss. You folks are the amplifiers that spread the ideas that lead to a less wasteful world. Let folks know that they can find Sustainability in Your Ear on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or any of the other fine purveyors of podcast goodness that you stop by. We will really appreciate your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. We'll be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.